And I've auditioned for a lot and haven't got a lot. And then Gran Torino came around where he was talking to me. It was like this little role.
You're one of the most famous actors in the world. Millions of people love you. You've won awards, made incredible movies, and everyone thinks you're the strongest man alive. But deep inside, you carry a secret so painful that it haunts you every single day. This is the story of Clint Eastwood and his son Scott. And trust me, by the end of this video, you're going to see both of them in a completely different way. For over 60 years, Clint Eastwood has been like a superhero to many people. When we see him on screen, squinting his eyes and standing tall, we think nothing can hurt him. He's the cowboy who never loses, the cop who always gets the bad guy, the director who makes amazing movies. But what if I told you that behind all that strength, there's a story of heartbreak that would make anyone cry? Today, we're going to talk about something Clint has kept quiet about for decades, the relationship with his son Scott. And warning, this story is going to hit you right in the heart. So grab some tissues, because you're going to need them. Let's start from the beginning. Clint Eastwood wasn't always a movie star. He was born during the Great Depression in 1930, when many families in America were struggling just to survive. His family moved around a lot because his dad couldn't find steady work. Young Clint learned early that life could be tough and unpredictable. He learned to be quiet, to be strong, and to keep his feelings inside. This would shape who he became as both an actor and a father. As Clint grew up, he faced many challenges. When he was just 21 years old, he was in a military plane that crashed into the ocean. Can you imagine? He had to swim for hours in the freezing cold water, fighting for his life. He later said, "I just kept swimming because stopping meant dying." This experience taught him that survival meant being tough and not showing weakness. When Clint finally made it to Hollywood, things weren't easy. Casting directors laughed at him. They said he was too tall, too awkward, that his teeth were too big. He worked construction jobs and parked cars just to pay for food. But he never gave up. Slowly, very slowly, he started getting small parts in movies and TV shows. Then came Rawhide, the TV Western that made him famous. For 8 years, people watched Clint play a cowboy who didn't say much but commanded respect. He perfected that famous squint, that quiet stare that said more than words ever could. After that came the spaghetti westerns that made him a worldwide star. The man with no name became a legend. But here's where our story takes a heartbreaking turn. While Clint was becoming famous, he was also living a very complicated personal life. He got married to a woman named Maggie Johnson in 1953. But even during his marriage, Clint had relationships with other women. And from these relationships came children. Children who would grow up knowing their famous father, but not always feeling his love. In 1986, a baby boy was born to a flight attendant named Jason Reeves. That baby was Scott Eastwood. But here's the part that will break your heart. When Scott was born, something terrible happened on his birth certificate. In the space where it should have said his father's name, it said 2 words that no child should ever have to see. Father declined. Can you imagine growing up and finding out that your own father, one of the most famous men in the world, refused to put his name on your birth certificate? Scott didn't grow up as Scott Eastwood. He grew up as Scott Reeves, carrying his mother's last name, living far away from Hollywood and Hawaii. While other kids had fathers who came to their school plays and baseball games, Scott's dad was on movie screens being a hero to everyone except his own son. While Clint was winning awards and being celebrated around the world, Scott was just a regular kid trying to understand why his father didn't want to be part of his life. Think about how that must have felt. Your classmates are watching your dad movies, cheering for him, talking about how cool he is. And you're sitting there knowing he's your father, but you can't tell anyone because he doesn't want you. That kind of pain doesn't just go away. It stays with you forever. Scott's childhood was spent mostly with his mom, Jacelyn. She did her best to raise him and his sister Catherine. But how do you explain to your children why their famous father chooses to stay away? How do you comfort a little boy who wonders what he did wrong to make his daddy not love him? As Scott grew up, he started to look more and more like his father. Same strong jaw, same piercing eyes, same tall build. People would sometimes say, "You look like that actor, Clint Eastwood." And Scott would just smile and change the subject, carrying the secret that yes, he was Clint's son, but no, his father didn't claim him. When Scott became a teenager, he had to watch his father on TV winning awards, giving speeches, being honored by everyone. Clint would thank his family in his acceptance speeches, but Scott knew he wasn't included in that family. He was a forgotten son, the one who existed but didn't matter enough to be acknowledged. The pain of this rejection shaped Scott in profound ways. Instead of becoming bitter and giving up, he decided to prove himself. He started working out, getting strong. He studied acting, determined to make it on his own. But he didn't use the Eastwood name. He wanted to earn everything himself, to show the world and his father that he was worthy, even if he had to do it alone. Scott moved to Los Angeles and started auditioning for movies. But he used his mother's name, Reeves. He worked as a bartender and in construction to pay his bills. He faced rejection after rejection, just like any other struggling actor. The difference was, while other young actors might have used their famous parents' connections, Scott couldn't. His famous father had made it clear he didn't want to be associated with him. Can you imagine the irony? Here was Scott, looking exactly like one of Hollywood's biggest stars, working minimum wage jobs and sleeping on couches, while his father lived in mansions and had everything money could buy. Scott later said those were some of the hardest years of his life, not just because of the poverty, but because of the loneliness of being so close to family yet so far away. Then, in 2014, something happened that made the pain even worse. Clint was directing a movie called American Sniper. It was going to be a huge film, the kind that wins awards and makes careers. Scott auditioned for a role in his own father's movie. He prepared for weeks, put his heart and soul into that audition. This was his chance to finally work with his dad, to show him what he could do, to maybe start healing their relationship. But when the casting decisions were made, Scott didn't get the part. His own father chose someone else over him. For Scott, this wasn't just a professional rejection. This was personal. It was like being declined all over again, just like on that birth certificate when he was born. While Scott was dealing with his heartbreak, tragedy struck in another way. His girlfriend, Jewel Brangman, was killed in a car accident. The woman he loved, who believed in him and supported his dreams, was suddenly gone. Scott was devastated. He later said that losing Jewel changed him forever, that he thought about her every single day. So here was Scott, dealing with a father who wouldn't acknowledge him publicly and the death of the woman he loved. Many people would have given up. They would have been bitter and angry. But Scott kept going. He kept auditioning, kept working, kept believing in himself, even when it seemed like the world was against him. Slowly, very slowly, Scott started getting small parts in movies. He appeared in films like Flags of Our Fathers and Gran Torino. Ironically, both of these movies were directed by his father, Clint, but even then, their relationship remained distant and professional. They worked together, but they weren't really father and son. They were more like strangers who happened to share the same DNA. As the years went by, Scott's career began to take off. He got bigger roles in movies like The Longest Ride, Suicide Squad, and Pacific Rim Uprising. People started recognizing his talent, not just his famous face. He was finally becoming Scott Eastwood the actor, not just Clint Eastwood's unacknowledged son. But success in Hollywood couldn't heal the wound in his heart. In interviews, Scott would sometimes be asked about his relationship with his father. He would always be polite, always professional, but you could see the pain in his eyes. He would say things like, "He's a great director," or, "I learn a lot working with him." But he never said, "I love my dad," or, "My father is proud of me." Meanwhile, Clint was getting older. He was in his 80s, then his 90s. The tough guy who seemed invincible was showing his age. And perhaps, as often happens when people get older, he started thinking about his life, his choices, his regrets. He started thinking about the children he had pushed away, especially Scott. In recent years, something beautiful and heartbreaking has started to happen. Clint and Scott have begun appearing together more often, not just as director and actor, but as father and son. They've walked red carpets together. done interviews together, been photographed side by side. And in those photos, if you look closely, you can see something changing. Clint, now 95 years old, seems softer somehow. The hard edges that defined his screen persona have mellowed. And Scott, now in his late 30s, stands beside his father with a mixture of pride and caution. It's like watching two people who have been strangers slowly learning how to be family. In recent interviews, Clint has started acknowledging Scott more openly. He talked about his talent, his work ethic, his character. These might seem like small things, but for Scott, who spent decades being invisible to his father, these acknowledgments must mean everything. Scott, for his part, has shown incredible grace and maturity. He could have been angry and bitter. He could have written tell-all books or given nasty interviews. But instead, he chose forgiveness. He chose to be present, to be available, to give his father a chance to be the dad he never was during Scott's childhood. There's one particular moment that really shows how their relationship has evolved. In a recent interview, Scott was asked what he learned from his father. Instead of listing acting techniques or directing tips, Scott said something profound. He said he learned that strength isn't about never showing emotion. It's about being brave enough to admit when you're wrong and try and make things right. This statement tells us so much. It tells us that Clint has probably apologized to his son, maybe not publicly, but privately. It tells us that Scott has seen his father vulnerable, not as the invincible movie star, but as an old man with regrets who wants to make amends before it's too late. The transformation we're seeing in both men is incredible. Clint, who built his career on being the strong, silent type, is learning to open up emotionally. Scott, who could have been consumed by resentment, has chosen love instead. They're both growing, both healing, both becoming better versions of themselves. But this story isn't just about redemption. It's also about loss and the passage of time. In 2024, Clint lost his partner, Christina Sandera, who had been a companion in his later years. At 94, he experienced the deep loneliness that comes with losing someone you love. And in that grief, perhaps he realized even more how precious family is, how important it is to hold on to the people who matter. Scott has been there for his father during this difficult time. The son who was once pushed away is now one of the people Clint leans on. There's something beautiful and heartbreaking about that. The boy who grew up without his father's love is now giving his father comfort in his old age. Their story reminds us that it's never too late to change, never too late to say sorry, never too late to build a relationship with someone you've hurt. But it also reminds us of how much pain could have been avoided if pride hadn't gotten in the way earlier. When we see Scott and Clint together now, we're not just seeing two actors or two celebrities. We're seeing the power of forgiveness, the possibility of redemption, and the strength it takes to rebuild a relationship that was broken from the very beginning. Scott could have walked away. He could have changed his name, moved to another country, lived his life completely separate from his famous father. But he didn't. He stayed. He waited. He gave his father chance after chance to be the dad he always needed. And Clint, despite his pride, despite his reputation, despite being one of the most powerful men in Hollywood, finally did something that took more courage than any movie role ever could. He admitted he was wrong. He opened his heart to the son he had pushed away. He chose love over pride. Their relationship today isn't perfect. How could it be? You can't erase decades of pain with a few public appearances. But what they have now is real. It's honest. It's a father and son who are finally learning to love each other, even if it took almost 40 years to get there. This story teaches us so much about family, forgiveness, and the courage it takes to change. It shows us that even the strongest people have vulnerabilities. Even the most successful people make mistakes, and even the most broken relationships can be healed if both people are willing to try. As Clint Eastwood enters what might be the final chapter of his life, he's not just known for being a tough guy in movies. He's also becoming known as a father who learned to love, a man who found the strength to admit his mistakes and try to make things right. And Scott Eastwood isn't just known as a talented actor anymore. He's known as a son who showed incredible grace, who chose forgiveness over anger, who proved that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is keep your heart open even when it's been broken. Their story isn't over yet. Every time they appear together, every interview where Clint mentions Scott with pride, Every moment where Scott stands beside his father with love instead of resentment, they're writing a new chapter. They're showing the world that families can heal, that love can win, and that it's never too late to start over. If this story moved you, if it made you think about your own relationships or your own family, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message of hope and forgiveness. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories that will touch your heart and change how you see the world. Because stories like this remind us that even in Hollywood, even among the rich and famous, the most important things in life are the same for all of us: family, love, and the courage to make things right.